Welcome to the High Income Business Writing Podcast, helping you propel your writing business to a whole new level. And now, here's your host, Ed Gandia.
Hey there, welcome to another episode of the High Income Business Writing Podcast, the number one podcast for business writers and copywriters and solo marketers who want to earn more in less time doing work they love for better clients. With over 1.3 million downloads from listeners just like you across 101 countries. I want to share an email I received a few weeks ago that's been on my mind lately. And it came from Michelle Roldan Shaw, a memoir ghostwriter. And I'm mentioning her name, her full name, because she gave me permission to use it. So I'm going to read from her email. She said, I focus on deep dives with clients who want to write a memoir or nonfiction book, which leaves a positive legacy in the world. I very strongly feel that the personal connection and collaboration I have with my clients on these long-term projects is as valuable as the writing itself. I've been telling myself that AI will never be able to compete with me on that, and that as long as I position myself with a human connection angle, I am safe. But maybe this is just a falsely comforting story. So Michelle's question or statement is very valid. It is a very valid concern. But what stopped me cold was that last line, a falsely comforting story. Because here's what I'm seeing in my coaching work and in discussions and conversations and emails with freelance writers, copywriters, and solo marketers. Writers in every niche are telling themselves some version of that story. So, for example, case study writers say, well, AI can't do interviews. Email copywriters say, AI can't understand my client's voice. And those focused on brand messaging might say something like AI can't capture brand personality. And you know what? They're not wrong. AI genuinely struggles with these things, at least for now. But they're asking the wrong question, because really the real question here isn't, can AI do what I do? The question is, what's actually most valuable about what I do, and how do I prove it? Because I provide human connection, that statement as a differentiator sounds nice, but that's just a vibe. And vibes don't help you create a competitive moat around your business. You know what does? Results, outcomes, specific measurable outcomes that clients can point to and say, that changed something important. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. Not just what makes your work valuable, but how to identify, develop, and position the skills that will make you indispensable in any niche, any target market, including memoir ghostwriting. And by the way, I'm going to come back to this idea of results because I don't want you to get hung up on or misunderstand what I mean by results. When I say that, I'm not talking about tangible ROI, for example, which is not appropriate in many cases. So I'm going to come back to that. But let's dive in the meantime. Look, AI is increasing the supply of words, and it's doing so, I would say, faster than anyone predicted about 3 years ago. And when the supply goes up, prices go down. That's just basic economics. But here's the part of the story we're not focusing on enough, I feel. That is that when one thing becomes abundant, other things become scarce. And scarcity is where the money flows. Think about it. 100 years ago, ice was expensive. You paid for ice delivery. And now ice is basically free. So what's expensive now? Well, a bunch of other things related to that. I'll give you one example. The craft cocktail bar that knows exactly which ice shape creates the perfect drink experience. There are cocktail bars out there that really focus on the whole ice experience. As silly as that sounds, that is a thing. So words are becoming like ice. That part alone is heading toward free. But don't misunderstand me here. There's important nuance in what I just said. I didn't say the writing is heading toward free. I said the words are. And it's a very important distinction. What's becoming expensive is meaning, discernment, judgment about what actually matters. And meaning gets created through three specific capabilities. Number one, deciding what's worth pursuing. Number two, extracting what's actually true. And number three, shaping it in a way that lands with impact. That's not AI's job. That's your job. Last month, I was on a Zoom call with a case study writer, and she was spiraling about AI potentially replacing her interview skills. She said something to the effect of, well, if clients can just feed transcripts to ChatGPT and get a decent draft, what's my value? And here's what I told her. Your value was never in the transcription, and she knows that. It also wasn't in converting a raw transcript into a draft. Your value shows up in three specific moments. First, when you hear what actually matters in an interview, not just what gets said. There's a big difference. Number two, when you ask the next question that exposes the real issue. And number three, when you shape raw material into a narrative that feels true, specific, and worth attention. AI cannot reliably do any of those things. Those are very human things that, at least for now, require lived experience, strong emotional intelligence, taste. But of course, there's a catch. If you can't do these things either, or if you can't prove to clients that you do them better than AI, then you're in trouble. Because I'm a good interviewer isn't a valuable differentiator anymore. That's just assumed. That's table stakes. That's expected. The writers who will thrive in the coming years are the ones who can produce meaning, and that starts with asking better questions. Now, I want to give you a simple test that you can run on any question you're about to ask a client or a subject matter expert or anyone you're interviewing. And question basically deserves to be asked if it does at least one of these five things. So let's explore that, because this is important stuff. If I'm really kind of steering you down the path of questions and questions that deserve to be asked, I think it's worth exploring. Well, what does that mean specifically? I think we can kind of know, but let's unpack it. The first is that the question that deserves to be asked changes decisions. So the answer would actually change the direction of the project, not just add detail. Let me give you an example. A bad question is, what are your company's core values? It's not that it's bad. It's just, that's not really going to give you what you want. Here's a better question. When you had to choose between hitting quarterly numbers and staying true to your principles, what happened? Notice the difference. The first question gets you corporate speak. The second one gets you a story that could reveal what this company, this executive, this founder actually values. Second, a question that deserves to be asked reveals what's truly at stake. It surfaces and identifies what could be lost or protected or proven. Here's an example of a bad question in this category. Why did you start this business? A better question here would be, what were you risking if this didn't work? Very big difference here. Stakes create tension. Tension creates what? Creates reader engagement. Now we're leaning in. We're drawn to what's the story. We want to know what's the answer here. Third, a question deserves to be asked if it exposes tension. I just really gave you a clue there in the last one. Contradictions, trade-offs, the stuff people don't want to talk about but need to address. This is where case studies and memoir ghostwriting actually overlap, because the best stories live in those contradictions. The moment that success felt like failure, or when doing the right thing meant breaking a promise, the trade-off nobody wanted to make but had to. AI generates the generic, if you will. Humans uncover the details and the nuance and the color that changes the whole story and the emotions that it elicits in the reader. And those details and nuance live in the tensions. All right, fourth, a question deserves to be asked if it forces specificity. Names and moments, scenes, actual dialogue, the details that make something feel real. Here's a bad question. Tell me about a challenging project. Here's a better question. Walk me through the exact moment when you realized this project was in trouble. What did you see? What did you hear? How did you feel? Generic stories are what? They're just blah, they're forgettable, but specific stories stick. We thrive and we're attracted and drawn to detail. Fifth and final point, a question deserves to be asked if it points to transformation. What was true before? What became true after? What it cost to make that change? This is especially crucial for memoir work, but it applies everywhere. Every case study is a transformation story. Every brand story is a transformation story. Every piece of compelling content is about something changing, morphing. Here's a bad question. What results did you achieve? Here's a much better question. What became possible after this wasn't possible before? Right? Here's the thing. You might be thinking, well, Ed, yeah, that's great. These are just better interview questions. I already asked good questions. I already asked many of the ones that you named or some version of that. And you know what? Maybe you do. But can you prove it to a prospect who's trying to decide between you and someone cheaper, or between you and doing their case studies in-house with AI? Because that's where this framework becomes valuable. It's not just about asking better questions. It's about being able to explain to clients why your approach, why your questions create better outcomes for them. When your prospect says, why should I pay you $3,000 for a case study when I can get one done for $500 and we can do it in-house in a couple hours? Your answer shouldn't be, well, I'm a better writer. Your answer has to be something like, well, here's why. Because I know which questions deserve to be asked. I know how to extract the real story, not just the surface story. And I shape it in a way that changes how your prospects think about their problems. See, that's a true value proposition. I'm not saying you need to copy that. I just want to give you an example. And that example is something that you can and should feel while you're saying it. It should come from a place of confidence, of knowing, not from, well, Ed told me to say this. Right? And you know what? If you're feeling it, if you have conviction behind it, that's something the right prospect or client will feel as well. So let me walk you through two scenarios where this plays out in real situations, in real projects. Scenario number one is the interview that changes everything. Years ago, I was working with a client on what seemed like a pretty straightforward customer success story of one of their customers. Standard questions would have been things like, well, what problem were you trying to solve? What made you choose this solution? What results did you see, right? Anyone can write a case study with those kinds of questions. And you know what? We would have gotten a perfectly fine case study with that line of questioning. It would have been a little boring, but fine. But about 20 minutes into the interview, I remember asking something to the effect of, what almost made you walk away from this project? Because I was sensing that this customer, there was tension there. And I don't know, I took a risk and just asked that. I felt like it needed to be asked and whatever he said needed to be said. And the client, fortunately, took it the right way. And he paused and then he said, well, our CEO almost killed it because he thought we were moving too fast. He had been burned before by a vendor who had promised the moon. And suddenly we had the real story. It wasn't about efficiency gains. It was about rebuilding trust after a bad vendor experience. And the whole angle shifted. Now, the question wasn't clever. It was precise. And what did it do? It was aimed at tension. I almost didn't ask it because I thought, I don't know. But I built enough trust and rapport with this person that I felt that it was the right thing to ask. And I'm glad I did because it changed the whole story. That's the difference between an okay case study and one that actually resonates with prospects who have been burned before. Scenario number two, let's call it the memoir that isn't what you think. So let's go back to Michelle's situation, memoir ghostwriting. Here's a trap that most ghostwriters will fall into. The client wants a chronology. They want to tell the story of their life from A to Z. They think that's the way it worked. They think that that's what makes sense. And yeah, eventually you want to have some chronology there, but that's almost never the real story. Now, I've never written a memoir, okay? But I mean, I know enough about storytelling that that's never going to be the real engaging story. The real story is usually it's usually about one of these things, right? And there's many more, but let me just throw some at you just so you see what I'm talking about. A real story is about things like abandonment, belonging, pride, betrayal, faith, reinvention, grief, and redemption. I love redemption stories. The client might not know that yet. They just want to write a book. They want to tell a story in a certain sequence. They think that's what makes sense. And your value as a ghostwriter isn't transcribing their life story. It's about helping them discover what the story is really about. And that discovery happens through what? It happens through questions. Here's some examples. What's the moment in your life you kept coming back to, even though it happened decades ago? When people misunderstand you, what do they get wrong? What costs you the most to learn? If you could spend an hour with your past self from 30 years ago, what would you tell her? These questions don't just gather information. They actually help the client understand and relive their own story and do so differently. And that's where the real value lives. Because look, here's the truth about any kind of storytelling work. The client is paying you to see patterns they can't see. They're paying you to identify the emotional center, to shape that narrative arc. They may not be using those words, but ultimately that's what they want for the fee they're paying you. And, AI can't do that. AI doesn't know what the story is about. AI can't show up and go into that room and ask these questions and feel the emotions that appear or surface from the client just sharing these experiences with you. AI is not a human who can just sit there and witness your client sharing something deeply personal. When a client shares something meaningful, that does something. There's something inside of you as a writer, as a human, that's not language, at least it's not spoken or written language. That's something deeper that's just really hard to express effectively with the limitations of language. But a solid ghostwriter finds ways to translate that and get it onto the page. AI, on the other hand, only knows what's been said. And that's it. Now, it may be able to copy and mimic, and it may do that really, really well. But at the end of the day, it's still not a conscious human having an experience. So let's bring this back to business strategy. How do you actually position this capability? Because most writers, when they're asked, well, what makes you different? Or some version of that question, say something like, well, I really listen to my clients, or I care about quality, or I bring a human touch to every project. And those are fine sentiments. They're also completely meaningless in 2026 and beyond. They worked before to a certain extent, but not anymore. Now, compare that to, I help companies extract the real story from customer interviews, the emotional drivers, and the hidden tensions that generic case studies miss. That's why my case studies consistently outperform industry benchmarks for prospect engagement. Or maybe I help executives write memoirs that actually get read, not chronologies that sit on a shelf, but narratives built around a central transformation that readers can't put down. You see the difference? The first approach does what? It focuses on vibes. It sells vibes. The second one sells outcomes. So that's why when I meant earlier, outcomes and results, that's a great example of that. Notice there's nothing in here about pure ROI and tangible numbers. It's way bigger than that. And again, it's about showing your systematic capabilities. It's about showing them all the different ways you can get them the results they care about. So to get a little more specific, let's take 3 different types of writers: case study writer, a memoir ghostwriter, a content strategist, and advisor. So for a case study writer, it's the ability to identify the emotional center of a success story, or the skill to extract tension and stakes through very targeted, very carefully crafted questions. And it's not just the prepared questions, by the way. It's being able to pivot and to move deftly within the interview and ask probing questions and clarifying questions, follow-up questions. And then the craft of structuring narratives that mirror prospect journeys. For memoir ghostwriters, it could be the ability to locate what the story is really about underneath the events, or the ethics and the judgment of what to include and what to protect, or the craft of shaping scenes and pacing and narrative arc in ways that create page-turning momentum. For content strategists and advisors, it could be the ability to ask questions that reveal gaps in their current thinking, the skill to synthesize insights across multiple interviews or multiple data sources, or the judgment to recommend what matters as opposed to what's just interesting. Notice what's not on any of those examples. I use AI, or I have great tools. Tools are just table stakes right now. Everyone has them now. Everyone can claim the same capability. So the premium, your premium, must be in judgment, discernment, taste, those sorts of things. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking, well, Ed, should I be using AI for this stuff at all? Right? So you just kind of talked us out of using these tools. And that's not it at all. My stance is this: use AI for acceleration and to amplify the capable professional you already are. But don't rely on it for authority. So AI can help you generate candidate questions before an interview. It can help you cluster themes around multiple transcripts. It's great at that. It can help you spot missing beats in a narrative outline or analyze whether your draft hits the emotional notes that you intended. It can provide that sounding board, and it's pretty good at those things, actually pretty amazing at some of them. But the premium work is still human. Things like choosing which questions to ask in the moment, reading what isn't being said, pressing at the right time without pushing too hard, shaping the story with taste. That requires a level of emotional intelligence and humanity and lived experience that AI simply doesn't have. And especially the ability to kind of pivot and adapt right there live in a conversation, right? I've said it many times before, but I think it's worth repeating. AI will only magnify the professional, the expert, the human you are today. If you're excellent, it will magnify that excellence. If you're incompetent, it won't make up for your shortfalls. That's the mistake a lot of people make. That's a misconception. If you're incompetent, it will magnify your incompetence. I'm going to give you an example. Last week, I was preparing for a strategy call with a home services client. I had AI generate 30 potential questions based on their industry and their business model. About 25 of them were garbage. It was generic surface level stuff that any rookie consultant might ask. 5 were excellent starting points, so I worked with those and I refined them. I added some context. I sequenced them strategically. During the actual call, I asked maybe 3 of those prepared questions. The real conversation happened in the follow-up questions, in the probing questions, the reading of body language. When I sensed hesitation, pivoting based on what I was hearing, in other words. And that's the dance. AI accelerates and refines the prep work, but the human executes the judgment. And that's exactly what I told clients when they ask about my process, or if they ask. I say, well, I use AI to accelerate things like research, to identify patterns, but the strategic recommendations, the editorial judgment, the questions that help us find the real insights that are going to matter, that are truly going to move the needle, that's all human. At the end of the day, they don't really care about my tools. They care that I bring thinking to the table, not just typing, not just cranking out words. So as we wrap this up, let me circle back to Michelle's question about memoir ghostwriting. Michelle, here's what I want to tell you. Now, I told you I was going to record a podcast episode where I was going to address your question, and this is it. Your instinct is absolutely right. AI can't replicate genuine human connection. It can't read between the lines of what someone's saying, and it can't sense when to push when to give your client the space she needs or he needs. And this is crucial. That's not enough, unfortunately, not anymore. The weak move is assuming that human connection alone is a strong enough differentiator. It's not. It used to be, but that's not anymore. Every ghostwriter can claim connection. Every case study writer can claim empathy. The strong move is proving in your positioning and your process and in your own words that your real advantage is judgment under uncertainty. So you decide what to pursue and what to ignore. You identify what the story is really about. You determine how to make it land emotionally without being manipulative. You choose what to include and what to protect. That's the value proposition. It's not I provide human connection, but it's rather something like I extract the story, the true story, and shape it into a narrative that readers can't put down. And if you can systematically deliver that result, you'll never worry about AI competition because AI generates pages, but you do something different. You create meaning. And that's what clients will always pay premium rates for. And by the way, there's something that's kind of subtext here, but I want to call it out. At the end of the day, they're buying you as a person, your personality. And everything that I've talked about, like those are things that bring out who you really are in your personality. But I want to really emphasize that something that we're not really talking about enough is the fact that at the end of the day, people want to work with people and they want to work with people they like, people they connect with. And many times that's what's going to seal the deal. But to get there, to show someone that you're the kind of person they really want to work with, you have to do all those things I've just talked about for the past 20, 30 minutes. So here's what I want you to walk away with today. And this is everybody, not just Michelle. When words get cheap, meaning gets expensive. And meaning is produced by asking better questions and shaping better stories. That's not a soft skill, and it's no longer a nice to have thing. It's the core competitive advantage that will separate thriving writers from struggling writers over the next few years. And Michelle's concern is not unique. Every writer in every niche is facing some version of what makes me more valuable when AI can produce decent drafts. And the answer isn't I'm human or I care more. Those are, well, it's the right intention. You're kind of on the right path. But that's pre-2023 positioning. The answer must be something like this. I know what questions deserve to be asked. I extract the real story and I shape it in ways that create the outcomes my clients need. That's something that will help land clients. That's premium. That's a business that grows instead of one that shrinks. And the writers who build the systematic capability, the people who can articulate it, who can prove it, who can deliver it consistently, those are going to be the writers who command the higher fees and who have a strong competitive advantage and don't have to worry about AI taking away their business. They're going to be able to attract better clients, build practices that are more resilient and more interesting than what most of us thought possible even a couple of years ago. I'm Ed Gandia. I thank you so much for listening today. And one more thing, if this episode gave you something useful, I'd be grateful if you shared it with a friend who might need to hear it. Until next time, keep asking better questions, keep shaping better stories, and keep building the business you actually want. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Well, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the episode. And just a quick reminder to grab your free copy of my latest book, Earn More in Less Time: The Proven Mindset, Strategies, and Actions to Prosper as a Freelance Writer. You can get your free copy at b2blauncher.com, where you will also find the detailed show notes to this and all my other episodes. Enjoy and have a great day.